Let's get reaction from the Democratic Alliance leader, John Steenhuisen. John, can you tell us what's the DA's reaction to the Supreme Court of Appeal ruling upholding that Gauteng High Court's finding that former President Jacob Zuma's medical parole was illegal?
Well, obviously, we are delighted with the outcome. It confirms the position that we took, which is why we took the case in the first place, that Mr. Fraser had acted unlawfully and outside the bounds of his powers. And I'm very glad that the court has now confirmed that. And we mustn't underestimate the significance of what the court has done today. They've essentially shut the door on the revolving door of medical parole that has been used continuously as a get-out-of-jail-free card by the ANC for their connected cadres, from Shabir Sheikh now to Jacob Zuma. And in the Zondo era now, as we hope to see more and more of the corrupt cadres go to jail, it's very good that they've cut off this get-out-of-jail-free scam where medical parole is granted to the connected few.
You think Zuma should now go back to jail, but that's not your decision to make. Do you think the Department of Correctional Services Commissioner, Mr. Tobakale, will come to the same conclusion that you have?
Well, the court was very specific that he must go to jail and that he must serve out for the full remainder of his sentence. But what they did leave to the discretion of the commissioner was to determine how much of the sentence had already been served. So just like any other, and I take no pleasure in people going to jail, but the law must apply equally to all South Africans, regardless of whether you're a former president or an ordinary citizen. The law and equality before the law and respect for that has to be paramount if we're to have a thriving society. Without it, without the rule of law, it becomes impossible to build a successful, progressive society.
What did you make of the backlash against the judiciary in this ruling, as well as the other important ruling of the day to grant Chris Hani's killer parole?
Well, we're a party that fundamentally believes in the rule of law, and therefore we respect the outcome of the judiciary. Had the case not gone our way today, we would have accepted the outcome of it and moved on, because that's what you do. What you don't do is undermine the judiciary. You accept the ruling and you then make your plans to either appeal or if it's the apex court, you accept what those findings are. That is what the rule of law is about, and it requires all of us to accept the outcomes of judicial matters, and it shouldn't be a matter of slinging against judges or the like. It's the way it goes. You win some cases, you lose some cases, but you always respect the outcome of those particular cases.
Given what took place in South Africa, and especially in KZN last June, what do you look at our political landscape and see at the moment that either makes you worried about a possible recurrence of that looting and unrest, or are you quite confident that that's behind us now?
Well, I would say two things. First of all, that should not be a consideration, because if that becomes the consideration, the precedent that sets is frankly too ghastly to contemplate, because it means that every warlord or rabble-rouser simply has to stir up public anger and violence to be able to avoid having the law applied to them. Secondly, I would hope that the South African Police Service, and particularly our alleged Minister of Police, Bheki Cele, would be a lot more prepared this time for any potential outfall, and that it is contained at source. Had we contained this particular uprising in July when it began outside the Nkandla homestead in KwaZulu-Natal, I think we could have prevented it. A strong message being sent out that the law will be applied and that the law enforcement agencies would have been on high alert. Instead, the State Security Agency, the SAPS, were wholly unprepared for what had happened. And so I would hope that they would certainly now be better prepared to prevent a recurrence of that. But that should not be the consideration when making or deciding matters like this. And I think the court was clear about that when it dismissed this as one of the reasons that Arthur Fraser had provided for the parole in the first place, that this cannot be a valid reason to simply grant somebody medical parole because you're scared of what their supporters will do. That will incentivize the rule of the mob or violent crowds. And I think that would be, as I said, a ghastly precedent to set in South Africa.
Well, thank you very much for your time. That was the DA's leader, John Steenhuisen, giving us reaction to today's ruling by the Supreme Court of Appeal.